Hey, all, welcome back to the Fire and Water Cooking Podcast. I'm Darren, I'm your host, and today I'm bringing back a couple friends of mine, Lloyd Cupiccia and Kevin Liddell. We're going to talk about steak, all different kinds of steak, where it comes from, cuts, grades, and all that. We're going to talk about it. I'll be right back with Lloyd and Kevin.
Smoking, grilling, getting hot and hotter, sous vide and chilling from fire and water.
Hey all, Inkbird's got a few new great products this year, and one of them is their brand new vacuum sealer. Has a very compact design, but has all the functions that you would need. Has a dry and moist option, plus a seal and vacuum seal button, and a stop button, plus a built-in bag cutter. It's small enough to fit in your drawer or take with you on vacation. So it also has an accessory attachment for any containers that use any other vacuum sealer brand containers. Check it out, guys. It's like $60 right now on Amazon, so it's also very affordable. And it's in Inkbird, so I know it's a good product. So check it out in the link below. Check out Inkbird products, and back to the show. Welcome back to the Fire and Water Cooking Podcast. I am Darren, I am your host, and today I've got another great guest that's been on before, Lloyd Cupiccia. He is also known as the Kosher Dosher. Today we're going to discuss steaks, and we want to dive, pretty deep into steaks. It's not a topic that is very limited. There's a lot of stuff we can talk about. So Lloyd, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks, Darren. Thanks for having me.
Where are you from again, Lloyd, so people who know who you are?
I live in Seattle, Washington, and don't hold that against me, please. But I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York.
And you are the Kosher Dosher. You have the Kosher Dosher blog. You're on many of the Facebook groups dealing with sous vide and other cooking. You love to do experiments. So make sure you check out the Kosher Dosher, D-O-S-H-E-R, the Kosher Dosher.
That's correct.
And we're going to talk about, like I said, steaks. I want to go into this because you see a lot of people, especially when you try to talk to people who don't know anything about sous vide or they know very little. All they think about is steak and how it can cook a steak, or what they heard it can cook a steak. But steak seems to be a popular topic even outside of sous vide. I know that, Guga, you know who Guga is from Sous Vide Everything, and Guga Eats. He does, I would say, 3 out of every 5 videos he does is steak. So it seems to be, he gets a lot of views. It seems to be very popular. People are always asking questions about how to, cook steaks and what the proper temps and times and all different kinds of stuff on the Facebook group. So I thought we would dive a little bit deeper into steaks as a topic today. So let's talk about all the different, I want to talk about all the different cuts, all the different grades and all that. So let's start out about, let's go into just the different grades of beef. If you go to your local grocery store or your butcher shop, there's 3 different kinds of grades that you normally see, but there's a lot more. If you look into it deeper, there are actually more grades than what are there. Normally what you see in your grocery store is choice. That's probably the most popular that people see. Prime is another, it's more of a top line. You'll see that restaurants advertise that they use prime as their grade of what they normally sell. Even though it's a grading system that they have certain guidelines that they use, it's still subjective from inspector to inspector because of the way the grading system works. And it's only graded on one part of the cow, which is the ribeye section.
Ribeye.
So
it's very subjective.
They grade the whole cow subjected on one piece of, one part of the cow. And with that, and here's what I've always heard is that with that grading system, graded prime, you're going to get more for that particular steer than you are if it was choice or select. And so they actually have to pay to have these graded. They're not something that the USDA does for free. I mean, they actually charge them to have these graded. So a lot of these farmers know that they have prime beef, but they don't want to have to pay the USDA to have somebody come in. And what if he decides he's going to grade that one choice, and they're still paying for it?
Yeah.
And they can't get as much for that steer. So I mean, that's the whole thing with from when I talked to the guys at Porter Road, is that they know that the steers that they're buying from these farms are top choice,
Yes,
top quality, and there's no way that they're going to pay extra to have it graded by somebody who may come in and, half of the ones they're going to grade as choice and half of them as prime. So they lose money on some of the other ones. So they just
all the money.
Decide not to do it. There's another one that I know occasionally I'll buy some meat. They call it no roll, and they say no roll because when they stamp it with the prime or choice or select, they roll the stamp. So they say no roll because there's no stamp mark on it from the
There's no grade at all.
Yeah, there's no grade. But that doesn't mean, like we were just talking about, doesn't mean it's not good. It just means that they didn't have it graded. So you could buy, no roll, beef, and it'd still be excellent.
Oh,
like
I've come across prime.
Let's see. Kevin's trying to join in. Let's see if we can get him to come in. See if he works.
I hope so. I've come across strip steak New Yorks that are labeled prime. I'm like, that's not prime. That looks like crap. And I've complained to the butcher. They go, well, it's the grading system. Technically, it's prime, although what it looks like is choice. And I've come across some other choice cuts. I ran across some tri-tip at Safeway. No, I'm sorry, it was Fred Meyer. I'm looking in the showcase. I'm like, that's prime. That is prime tri-tip, but nobody knows it. And I bought 10 packages. This is before COVID.
Yeah, and I see that all the time on the Facebook groups. People will post something up, and it'll have really good marbling, and they'll say, look, this is labeled as select, and it's, you can tell that it's not. Kevin, are you there? Can you hear
Hang on, I have an audio problem.
Yay, all right. Kevin's in. Kevin's in the house.
All right.
Yeah, and I got to fix my audio issues.
We can't see your pretty face.
All right, well, you fix your audio, and we're going to continue to talk. And
Great.
So, yeah, I've seen it to where like I said, it goes back to because the grading is done on just one part of the cow, to me, it could be, perfect somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
It could look like prime on the ribeye, and then you go to the, the top sirloin section, and it look totally different, and vice versa. So, yeah, that's why I'm really not really big on the grading system.
Yeah, I'm here. All right.
Awesome.
Okay. So what do you think about the grading?
Hard.
What do you think about the grading system, Kevin? We're talking about the USDA grading system and how it can affect the farmers and ranchers, and they have to pay extra for it and all that.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is beneficial if you're a big producer to pay the extra to have USDA inspectors. I think now it's a flawed system. They grade it from the 12th rib of the ribeye, and that's all they look at, and that's how it's graded. And they grade that. They use the intermuscular fat content and what they believe to be the yield of the animal as far as red meat goes. And what they do now, it used to be all done by eyeball. Now they actually use cameras that send a photo to a computer that analyzes the pictures, and it actually grades the animal automatically. Now the USDA inspectors, if they don't agree with the computer's evaluation of the quality of the meat, they can override that system, but generally they don't have to.
Yeah. Yeah. And like we were discussing that a lot of the online sources like Crowd Cow and Porter Road, most of the farmers that they buy from don't have their meat graded because they have to pay extra for it, and they can actually lose money because if they have a prime cow and that particular part that they're grading doesn't look right, that whole cow is now, they've lost money on it. So it's
ungodly expensive.
Yeah,
it's really expensive. If you're not a big player, you can't afford it.
Right. Yeah, I'm actually buying a cow. It'll be done this coming week. I think I'll have it in my freezer, but I know the guy who raised it, and I know that the steers that he used, and I've bought from him before, so I know it's going to be a really top quality beef. But he doesn't pay to get it graded, so he doesn't need to, because he doesn't sell, like you said, he's not selling to high end restaurants or supermarkets where he can actually get more money for it, for a volume because of its rating. So let's talk about, since the grading system is kind of subjective, and you'll find it, like me and Lloyd were talking about how he'll find something that's labeled as choice or even select in the store, and it looks like it's prime because of the marbling in it, which is what they go by. What about the breed?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I was just about to bring that up. I was just about to say the same thing, but Lloyd beat me to it because I was late to the party. But yeah, many times I found a nice, Delmonico, and I'm like, this should be prime, and it's choice, and I'm paying choice. I mean, I'm happy, but I'm sure the guy who sold the steer isn't happy.
Yeah, and that's the thing, and that's why when I had the CEO from Porter Road on, that's one of the things he said, that the farms that they buy from, that's where it's the catch-22. It's great when that that steer is graded as prime, because the whole steer is graded as prime, so they can sell that whole thing at top dollar. But what if you got one that 90% of it looks like it's prime, but that one part that they took a picture of is they graded as a choice or a select, and now you've lost so much money on that steer. So when you're talking hundreds of pounds of beef in one steer, I mean, that's a lot of money to lose. So let's talk about the breeds of beef, because one of the things I think, especially nowadays, people don't understand that, like, Wagyu is not a grade of beef; it's a actual breed. And it's actually
Wagyu actually means. Well, Wagyu actually, I think it means Japanese cow.
Right.
I think it means, yes.
Yep.
And people will think of that as a grade, and then also, they get confused even more because there's American companies out there using Wagyu that it might be 10%, Wagyu in it, and it's a Wagyu crossed with, different other breeds of cow, but there's no really system that monitors how they use the term Wagyu.
I think, I did read, though, on the U.S. government website, and in order for them to label something Wagyu, the breed's got to be at least 50%, but I don't think there's any checks or balances as to.
I don't think they can get fined or anything for it. Maybe something with the FTC with truth in labeling, but that's the whole thing. I mean, I see people all the time that will post up look, I got some Wagyu, and they're thinking it's Japanese A5, but it's like, no, buddy, that's not the experience.
That's choice. That's choice.
Right.
It's the equivalent of calling California sparkling wine champagne.
Right. So and I've had some good domestic Wagyu that was, and some of it, there's some that it's actually 100% Wagyu breed. They're raised in Texas or Washington State. Even there's some that they're not cross, but they're still not the A5. They're still not the things that are coming out of Japan. They are a little bit better than the ones that are crossed with Angus or other different breeds, but it's still not the stuff that you get from Australia or Japan. That's the pure A5, A4 Japanese Wagyu.
Well, just my opinion. I've had a lot of Wagyu A5 from Crowd Cow. Amazing. But I gotta tell you, my preference is the crossbreeds between Black Angus and Wagyu mixed together. I prefer the taste of the meat over the A5.
I've actually had the A5, and I've had the olive Wagyu, which is the one that's where they only eat the husks of olive, the olives there in Japan, which is supposed to be super, super rare. But I'm kind of with you. It's too rich. It's god awful expensive, for one. You can't eat that every day, and you can't even eat it once a month because it's so expensive. But it's so rich that and it melts in your mouth, and it's not. I don't know. It's something different you got to try, but it's not something that you really want to try very often and eat, very often at all. But
the way I would describe it, I'm sorry, go ahead, Kevin.
Well, a 12-ounce steak is for 3 people. You know, we're used to eating a 12-ounce steak on our own, but when you have A5, that real
24
rich
or
stuff,
36.
3 or 4 ounces is about as much as you want to eat.
Yeah, and it's like I said, it's kind of like eating. I don't know. It's just super rich.
Foie
It's
gras.
not. It's like foie gras or caviar or something. It's something you don't want to have a whole lot of because it's overpowering. It's really super rich and it's expensive on top of that. But I've had some the 100% Wagyu from raised in Texas. That's actually pretty darn good. And I've had some of the cross that is pretty good too. Now, I've had it that I thought was better than regular prime. Some of that you're still paying a premium for, but you're not paying that A5 or A4, premium. You're paying maybe 20% more than you would for prime or something like that. Which I see that I can do that. I can eat a whole New York strip of that cross Wagyu and
Yes.
feel good about it. And
I kind of give this analogy when I'm eating like olive Wagyu or an A5 Wagyu from Crowd Cow. It's like you're eating beef, but you're not eating beef.
right.
Maybe it's the American in me. I'm like, this is good, it's rich, and it's beef, but it's not beef. So
Yeah.
it's good, but it's kind of like I like the Wagyu crossbreed with Black Angus is my favorite.
Yeah, exactly.
So
A lot of that, since it is a crossbreed, that's not really graded. You won't see that graded either.
no, you will not.
And I don't know why that is. Go ahead, Kevin.
I think one of the reasons they probably don't get that stuff graded is because they're not going to exceed grading of prime.
Right.
And you figure if you're using that type of cattle, you're going to get at least prime out of it. I mean, I doubt they get too many selects or canners out of them. So, why bother paying when you've got the label, you've got the term Wagyu in there, and there's a certain expectation that it's going to be prime or above. But as a domestic producer, you're never going to get above prime. So, how do you promote it? So why bother?
Yeah, I can understand that. Definitely. If you can stick prime on it or Wagyu on it, there's no reason to have prime on there as well and pay the extra money to have it graded. That's for sure. So, like I said, I've had some of the, because with Crowd Cow and Proud Cow, you can pick the farms, and some of the farms, they are 100% Wagyu, but they're domestic raised. So they're not treated the same as the A5 and the A4, but it's definitely, you get one of those steaks, you can definitely tell it's above prime. That's for sure. So
Crowd Cow's been really good to me. They've sent me some free stuff and I've tried. I like it. And they have a farm that's not too far from me. I've been thinking of contacting them, and driving up to see them, but I don't know if they would sell straight to me or not. I mean, I might as well go through Crowd Cow, but Crowd Cow's, yeah. But all those places you mentioned, Porter Road, Snake River Farms, all their products that I've tried have all been really good quality.
they have to be able to resell to people. People reorder because they can't see it. You're looking at it online. You're seeing a picture of it. You're not going to your local butcher shop or your supermarket. So when somebody gets it in order for you to reorder from these guys, they have to go give you a good product. And I haven't had a bad product out of any of them. I've ordered from all 3 of those that we named. So, and they're all great. So, all right. So let's talk about grass-fed versus grain-fed, because that's another big, I don't know, people tend to get on these buzzwords, grass-fed being, that's the most healthy, that's the best for you. It's kind of like, organic and gluten-free and, all these other buzzwords that are out there. Personally, I used to order grass-fed beef because my wife got it hooked up through one of her friends, and we ordered it a couple times through a farm out of Tennessee, and I was never happy with it because it tastes kind of gamey and there's not a lot of fat on it. So it was always kind of tougher than what I...
Was it 100%?
It was 100%. It was 100% grass-fed. And so I was never really happy with it, but people get locked into these buzzwords. They think, grain-fed has been, demonized. Like when people say grain-fed, they think of these commercialized farms where they're just, all, the cows are all stuck in their, one spot, and they're just force feeding them, all kinds of fatty stuff to make them fat. And that's not usually the case anymore. Most of the stuff that I get and what you can get from Crowd Cow is all grass fed and grain finished. And that's what the cow I'm actually getting now is they're grass fed when they're out on the pasture, most of their life. But the last 3 or 4 months, they start giving them supplemental grains to fatten them up. So what are you guys' thoughts on that?
They're all, every animal you buy, every steer, cow, whatever, is grass fed. That's for sure. So there are places that take advantage of that and say grass fed, but they don't say 100% grass fed. So there are people that are kind of doing some shady marketing practices because they're all grass fed at some point. You can't feed them grain their whole life. One of the things with grain finished is that cows are ruminant animals and they're not made to eat grain. They're made to eat grass. So when we feed them grain to finish them and fatten them up, you have to put antibiotics in there because the grain irritates their rumen. And the rumen gets irritated and it'll get infected. And that infection will go to their liver and kill the animal. So you have to have a constant, steady supply of antibiotics in that feed to keep the rumen from getting infected. And that's where that E. coli, the E. coli you hear about that it's associated with ground beef and that sort of stuff, that originated in the CAFOs, which the CAFO, C-A-F-O, is a concentrated animal feeding operation. And that's where most of the cattle you buy are finished for grain. They're pasture raised at the ranch, and then they're shipped off to the CAFO, and they're finished there, and then they go to slaughter. But since there's so much antibiotic, we're using 80% of all the antibiotics we use in this country go to our farm animals, go to our livestock.
Well, yeah,
grain finished.
Grain finished is and I think it's kind of like I said, when people hear grain fed, that's what they picture. They picture these big, farms with the cows just being stuffed grain, their whole lives and then slaughtering them up. And it's not really the case. That they're fed it for a certain amount of time to fatten them up. And most of the times, like I said, they're taken care of. I just never could get a handle on just the grass fed only, because it just was never tasty to me. It always had that kind of gamey taste like you get with imported lamb, and it was tougher. It didn't have much fat to it. And, even the farm we bought it from, they had sent you special instructions on how to cook the roasts and stuff. So you didn't dry them out and all that because they knew it cooked different than regular, stuff you buy in the store. So,
well, I would disagree a little bit, Darren, because in the Northwest, we've got a company called Painted Hills Farms. So they have natural beef that are basically grass-fed and then grain-finished. They also have 100% grass-fed beef, no hormones, nothing, that tastes pretty damn good. That being said, though, I've had some grass-fed beef that are horrible.
Yeah.
It's disgusting. You wasted your money. So it's hit and miss, I think, depending on the farm and what they're eating on the farm.
Well, it could also go back to the breed as well. I mean, maybe some breeds, like maybe if it's a cross Wagyu, since it naturally, the DNA of that particular cow has a little bit more marbling to it automatically, and a different kinds of fat, that it may be better for that one to be 100% grass fed instead of 100% Heifer or just a Black Angus. So. I mean,
but I've had grass fed with good marbling. It tastes like crap.
Yeah.
So I think it has to do with the farm, maybe the weather, what type of grass they're eating, what kind of. Yeah, I think it's hit and miss. You got to be really careful.
Right. So I guess what I'm trying to get at in these first couple is that all these buzzwords that people kind of look at and hear and don't really know what they mean. So going back to the grading system of prime, choice, and select, and then Wagyu, and is it 100% Wagyu? Is it cross? Is it A5? Is it Japanese? Is it grain fed, grass fed, grain finished, grass fed? All these things that people confuse people. So I mean, I always try to look as deep as I can into things. So I think bringing these up to the surface and letting people understand that, they're not the only ones that are seeing all these things and being confused. That's for sure. Go ahead.
By the way, you guys heard of or tried that carrot fed beef out in California?
No, never heard of it.
Yeah,
Wow.
there's a company. I'll send you a link that they feed these. They're kind of relatively new. They've been doing it maybe a couple of years, I think. I'm not positive, but yeah, they're feeding the animals like a carrot diet. Like they're eating a lot of carrots.
So a lot of
It'll
beta
be interesting to see
carotene.
what that turns
I
out.
guess.
I know that a lot of some of the, the 100% grass fed can get that yellow tinge to it because of the the different
Beta carotene.
the beta carotene from just the grass. And there's a lot more beta carotene in carrots. So I'm sure it'd be a lot,
Yep.
it'd be really, I'm interested to see that. So I want to get into the cuts now. We can kind of move on. I mean, those buzzwords and, with the grading and the types of cows and the type of feed and all that, people are going to have to decide on their own what they like and go down that rabbit hole. But I want to go into the cuts, and I've got a chart I want to pull up that I use a lot that I send people to. It's the I'm sharing the screen, Kevin, so that it's just it's got the different cuts, retail cuts that you would normally see in a supermarket, and also it has a there's another chart that goes into commercial type cuts that maybe a butcher shop or a restaurant would buy. So
Can you send that to me, Darren? Can you send that
it's
to
actually
me?
it's right it's right on the Beef Council's website. If you go to the Beef Council,
Yeah, I'll take a look at it.
And they've got both of them. They're right on there on the front page. But
okay.
It breaks it all down. If you can see that at the top, it kind of shows you the different sections of the steer, and this is each half has these. So most people don't know that with most of your cuts on a steer, you have two sides. They have two sides of it. There's only certain things that they only have one of, like a hanger steak, and but everything else though, you have it on both sides. So you got the different sections. Your chuck section, everybody's kind of familiar with chuck roasts and that, but me and Kevin and I have talked about this before, the different cuts that are within the chuck when you start breaking that chuck section down, which they only really started doing that, this seam butchering in the last 10 years or so, where you can get some of these steaks. Like I talked about this with the CEO of Porter Road, like the steaks, like the Denver steaks and the Flatiron steaks, they only started really serving those in restaurants within the last 10 or 12 years. Before that,
Flatiron.
Yeah, the Flatiron, they would normally just toss it into, for ground, or it would be part of the chuck, and they would cut it all into chuck roast. So a lot of these sections, the Terrace Major. Also part of the chuck section now. There's a lot of these, when they start seam butchering these big primals now, that they've started pulling these parts out, like the Denver steak and the chuck eye roast, like you were talking about earlier, Kevin, when we were talking, these pieces that people don't know about. So I highly recommend you go to this chart and just go to, it's the Beef Council's main website, and they've got these charts up there. A lot of these you won't see at your local supermarket. And you can go to the butcher, probably there, and ask them for it. Because what a lot of people don't understand now is that there's this thing about 20 years ago or so they started doing with beef, is instead of shipping, the carcasses and having them butchered, by the local processors, they would process them all in this one area and then put it all in a big box, and then you would buy just like the subprimals. So the butchers won't buy like half a steer anymore. They buy just boxes of like prime rib primals, or the chuck shoulder, or just the certain sections, and then kind of space it out and cut it out from there. So a lot of these,
that's why butchery is a dying art. I mean, people are meat cutters now. They're not butchers.
Well,
butchery takes a lot of skill.
Yeah. So, but in the last few years, though, I've seen more and more specialty, seam butchers coming. And you can go on YouTube and watch some of these guys that will actually break down a whole half of a steer and break it down just by using a knife, and show you all these different pieces that you would never have thought were in the half of a steer, and show you just by cutting it from where the muscles groups, attach. That's why they call it seam butchery. It's the seam where the muscles attach to each other, and they just pull these pieces out. It's amazing to me. I've watched a few of those where you can see them pull the tri-tip out, for instance, because the tri-tip is something. I'm on the East Coast, and I think, Kevin, you're on the East Coast. We don't see tri-tips much here unless we're actually
It's everywhere.
Yeah, on your
In the
coast,
Northwest.
on the west, in California and on the West Coast, it's all over the place. But it's starting to become a lot more popular over here. But you got to search for it to get a tri-tip.
But you guys have the coulette and the picanha. We don't have that out here.
Well, because we have a lot of South American, I do in Florida anyway. There's a lot of Latins, and that's a big cut in Brazil and some of the other South American countries. So that's actually just part of your top sirloin. It's the top section of your top sirloin, and then your tri-tip is actually a piece, a separate muscle that's attached to the top sirloin, and it sits up against the sirloin tip and the top sirloin. And it just kind of sits right in between, and they got to actually work to pull that out of there, So a lot of times that gets ground up into ground beef because the butchers or the processors don't want to take the time to pull that thing out. They'll just cut the top sirloin out and then throw the rest of it into trim to grind it up. So there's a lot more. Once you start looking at some of these charts, I'm going to go back to the other one because this is the retail one. What you'd normally see at a retail butcher shop nowadays, and then you see there's a lot of different cuts in there that you don't normally see in your local supermarket, for sure.
There's a local farm that sells at the farmers market every Saturday here. They raise beef, and I talked to this guy like last summer. And I was like, where do you get this stuff butchered? He told me. I'm like, is it USA? He's like, oh, yeah, this guy's really – I'm like, how good is he? He's like, oh, this guy's really good. I'm like, well, you're missing – like, have you ever heard of this and this? And he had never heard of it. So this guy who's butchering his animals is giving them Delmonico's, New York strips, flank steak, all the basic stuff, but, probably throwing the rest of the stuff in. It's all ground beef. And there are a lot of value added cuts that he's missing out on. So he's selling ground beef for $4 a pound when he could be selling, the hanger steak or, the picanha or some of these other, for $12 a pound.
Yeah. And that's one of the things.
Doesn't have a good butcher.
I just, since I ordered this steer from a friend of mine, the processor, he's never used this processor before, and he's kind of an old timey guy. And I pretty much had to ask him, can you pull these out? Can you pull the tri-tips out? Do you know where they are? Because I went to a butcher shop that a guy's been a butcher for 20 years a couple of weeks ago, and I asked him for a tri-tip, and I didn't look to see what he'd put in the wrap. He wrapped it up and just brought it to me, and I just assumed he knew what a tri-tip was. I got it home, and it was picanha because it looks like a triangle. So he thought it was tri-tip, and that's what he's been calling tri-tip, and that's what he calls tri-tip in his butcher shop. But it's, and I did a video on my YouTube channel about that because people do. They'll see it because it looks like a triangle because it's the top of the sirloin, top sirloin. They call it tri-tip, and it's not. There's a totally different piece that's the tri-tip. So a lot of times the butchers don't know what they're doing because they don't take the time. And like I said, it takes them more time to pull these sections out, and they're not going to bother with that if it's, boxed beef because most of the stuff's already pre-cut for them. They're just kind of finishing it off, trimming it a little bit more, cutting it into the, steak sizes. They'll get the rib primal, like you can go to Costco or Sam's Club and you get the rib primal, where bone in or bone out is pretty much your choice. And then you just cut it into steaks. That's kind of what they're getting. They're getting it just like that in that cryo pack. And all they're doing is, like you said before, Kevin, is they're cutting them into steaks. That's all they're doing. They're not butchering. They're just steak cutters, just tell them how big you want it. And that's it.
Like Kevin said, it's a lost art.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you go on YouTube and you watch some of these guys, where they just have a knife and they're butchering this, half of a steer and just pulling it apart by the separate sections, where where the muscles meet and they're pulling these sections out. It just amazes me. So you got, everybody knows what a filet tenderloin is. Denver steak comes from the chuck. Flat iron steak comes from the chuck. These are every cut of this is certain muscle groups or parts of muscle groups. The hanger steak comes from the diaphragm. There's only one of those. That's one of the things we talked about. There's only one of those per steer because it sits in the diaphragm, and it's a muscle that gets worked a lot. So it's really tasty and very, very flavorful. Everybody knows what a T-bone or porterhouse is. It's part of the filet and part of the New York strip.
Shrimp.
This here is the food service one now. And this is like what like a restaurant would order, or even what the butcher could order, like in the box beef, but where you can get, like the chuck roll section, like the whole shoulder clod, or
good for barbecue.
Yeah. Like here, the shoulder clod here, it's got, and that's where you'll find like, your flat iron steaks and stuff are part deep into the shoulder clod, which is a group of muscles. It's not just one muscle. It's like a group of different muscles. So your teres major is a part of that as well.
Love teres major.
So
although they call it different things, and depending on the butcher you go to, I've petite tender, bistro filet.
Right.
A lot of names.
So this is just showing you, like I said, the what a restaurant could order or butcher shop, just the bigger cuts. Different cuts. They can also order the tri-tips and stuff like that. But the knuckle, which is, a part of the round that they use mostly for like roast beef and stuff like that. The steamship round. I don't know if you guys have ever been to a buffet, like in a higher country club or even on a cruise ship. They'll usually take a steamship round, which is that thigh muscle, and they keep it in one big chunk and they cook it up and into a roast beef, and they'll do a carving station with it because it looks so, it's just one big hunk of massive beef that they use. So those are
they were the bane of my existence when I was cooking at the Boca Raton Resort and Club, because we did a bunch of those, and they're about 85 pounds a piece. Yeah. And hauling those out of hot ovens, it's a real pain in the butt.
And they're usually kind of tough, so you got to cut them really thin. It's kind of like a top round, because it is from part of the round. So it's like the London broil or top round. You got to cut them kind of thin, unless you cook them sous vide or some other way you tenderize them. But
pretty much a whole steer leg.
Yeah, that's pretty much, it's a whole back leg pretty much. So I'm going to go ahead and get out of this. So let's, we talked about the tri-tip and the chuck, chuck roasts, the chuck roll itself contains a lot of different steaks that they can pull out of there. What's your favorite steak in the whole cow? Let's go with Kevin since we can't see him.
Oh boy, that's pretty tough. I mean, it depends what I'm in the mood for. Sometimes I enjoy a filet mignon, and everyone says they don't have that much flavor, and that's kind of true. They're not as beefy as, other cuts, but sometimes they have their spot and they're really enjoyable. But in general, I'm probably going to go with a Delmonico. Yeah, I mean that's basically it. New York strips have more flavor, but they're tough. I meant a ribeye steak.
Yeah.
Now
I'm like a lot of people. I like a ribeye steak, and I usually I don't care to have a bone in. I don't think it adds any flavor to the steak at all. And people will argue about silly things like that. I think, it can help protect a side of it if you're cooking it, hot and fast or something. But I like boneless ribeye just as well as anybody else. But I tell you what, since I started doing sous vide, I really like top sirloin. I can actually, to me, it has a lot more flavor. I don't know if it's because it's more of a working muscle, kind of like the hanger steak where, and like the picanha, it actually has more flavor to it. And I can make it nice and tender using sous vide. And a lot of the stuff that normally would be tough, like a chuck roast, I like chuck roast just as well as a ribeye because I can use sous vide to make it just as tender. And it has just as much marbling in it. And then, some of that connective tissue and it starts to break down. It's pretty flavorful too.
Now that I think about it, I want to change my answer. Outside skirt steak is my favorite. I'll take
Oh,
outside
wow.
skirt steak over anything any day.
Yeah, I like skirt
Now,
steak and flank steak too. Yeah.
Yeah.
flank's great. They both do well with marinades because they're thin, and they have a lot of surface area because they have very big texture. There's a lot of fibrous. You can see the fibers really well defined in both of them. Outside skirt steak is great. It has more. Now inside skirt's good, but it's not nearly as good as outside. The outside has better marbling. It's a better steak all around. And I've done the outside skirts sous vide, and you don't have to cut them. If I just grill one, I cut it against the grain because it can be a little chewy otherwise. But when I do them sous vide, I don't have to cut them against the grain. I can cut them with the grain and eat them, and they're perfectly tender and wonderful.
Yeah, and all these I like tri-tip. I love tri-tip as well.
Oh,
And and I talked to, I can't remember who I talked to. I think it was probably the guy from Porter Road. But some of these normally tough if you cook them traditionally, they taste more beefy, even though they may not be as marbled as like a ribeye or other parts or even the chuck. But since they're harder working muscles, they get more blood flow into them, and it just tastes more beefy. So you being able to use sous vide to make them a lot more tender and then finishing them off and still being medium rare, they just taste totally different.
What's your time and temp for top sirloin, Darren? By chance, what is it? I'm curious.
I normally do like 132 for 6 to 8 hours on that.
That's what I do. I go like 6 to 8, depending on what I'm looking at how thick it is. May go a little longer.
I found my wife, her favorite cut is London broil or top round, however you guys want to call it. I call it. The supermarkets will label top round London broil all the time, and people will have fits in the Facebook groups when you call it London broil. Because that's a cooking method. But top round is one of my wife's favorite because she doesn't like fat, and I can cook that sous vide and make it super tender, and she loves it.
You go about 11 hours with that.
Oh, I know. I go 24 to 36 on that.
Really? Wow. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, because she likes it like it'll be like
tough.
Yeah, it'll go like a fillet.
I guess how thick? Are you buying like the 2-inch steak or something like that?
They're actually the top round roasts. So, yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, she loves that stuff because it comes out to like a fillet to her, and she loves it. So
I love it for beef jerky.
It's only $2.40 a pound, so she loves it for that. All right, let's go into, since we're talking about cooking methods, let's go into some cooking methods and how people can make a better steak. And one of the things I want to talk about is dry brining, marinades, all that kind of stuff. What is dry brining? Because I know people also will argue about this because there's no such thing as dry brining, because brining means putting it in liquid.
Well, over time, terms changed. Dry brining came in the 1980s. So yes, it's an actual term. People need to get with the program. I'm sorry. Dry brining. Put salt on a meat, okay? I get annoyed with people that say, oh, brining only means water and salt. No, it does not. The term changed back in the 80s. Get modern. But for me, I dry brine every piece of meat, from lamb, chicken to beef. I do it all. So with salt, I'm pretty precise. So my personal favorite for steak is 0.60%. Kevin likes about 1 to 1.5% salt. Am I right, Kevin?
Yeah, I'm a salt guy.
You're a salt guy, yeah, and I'm a little less salt. But dry brining is awesome. And would your viewers like to know why we salt our steaks?
I think they do, but I don't measure mine. I just dump mine on.
Well, I'll do that with rubs, but the reason why we dry brine our proteins, for several reasons: flavor, right? Salt gets inside the meat. It creates a surface brine, water, moisture, gets reabsorbed. It denatures the protein strands, means it loosens them up a little bit. So during the cooking process, they won't squeeze as hard, so you get to retain more moisture after the cook. And damn, it's just good. The argument about, naked, not naked inside a bag and stuff like that. I think people that like naked steaks, steak in a bag, sous vide, knock yourself out. I prefer mine with some salt.
Yeah, I definitely.
A lot of people say this. A lot of people say the salt also, when you dry brine something, will make the meat more tender. I don't know if that's true. I would imagine if it's retaining more moisture, it's going to be more tender because water doesn't have a lot of resistance. So
I would say, Kevin, that when they say it's more tender, it's because, and I'm not a food scientist, is that the protein strands loosen up a little bit, which maybe gives the perception that it's more tender.
Yeah, I mean, it might be. I've never tested it.
Yeah,
I don't I haven't done a dry brine against a non-dry brine steak, and I'll probably have to do that sometime soon.
I have.
Well, I know, like with when you use the other the nitrites and nitrates, that does do some kind of tenderization. I don't think it's anywhere near what you can get when you use sous vide or other marinades, that have acid in them or the other chemicals like the stuff that pineapple and other stuff like that has. Yeah, it doesn't have. It's not that kind of tenderization, but there is some kind of tenderization it does. One of the things that I know, and that you can prove this by one of the articles on Amazing Ribs that Dr. Blonder did, is that sous vide cooking, or how he put it, I think he did this before sous vide was actually popular, is low temperature cooking actually speeds up the brining process. So if you do salt your steaks before you put them in a sous vide bag and cook them, it's going to actually speed up the brining process because the heat agitates the salt particles and actually makes them flow more into the meat. And he actually did some tests on that where he put dye in it, so that actually so what I end up doing now is I don't pre-dry brine my steaks if I'm going to cook them sous vide, unless they're really super thick, or if it's a really big roast I will. But if it's just like a 1.5 inch or 1 inch steak, I won't even pre-brine it. I'll just put the salt, put it in the bag, and it actually speeds up the brining process. So
I tested that theory, by the way, and yes, Dr. Blonder is correct. It does penetrate during the cook. However, and I did like 4 or 5 steaks from 12 hours. Salt in a bag, 6 hours, 12 hours, 24 hours, up to 40 hours. And I got to tell you, although the salt does penetrate during the cook, there's a benefit for waiting at least 12 to 24 hours. It's better, in my opinion, and my guess.
Does it go deeper? Does it go?
Yeah. So in other words, if you have a 1.5 inch steak that you dry brine for 24 hours, it might have went in, let's say, 1/4 inch on both sides. During the cooking process, it probably went into the center. Whereas what you're doing, you're throwing salt in the bag, sous vide it, and yes, you're getting deeper penetration, but not to the very, very center. So there's a benefit to dry brining it at least 12 to 24 hours.
Gotcha.
If you got the time. I mean, unless it's side by side, you're not going to be able to tell the difference.
Right.
At all. You're not.
Yeah. And, that's another thing. If it's convenience, and a lot of the convenience factor is, I'm big on that too, because do I want to, I'm already with sous vide, you have to have that time that you got to adjust for, longer cooking times. So do you want to add on top of that another day or so for dry brining? So
let's see technique.
Yeah. So let's talk about the different cooking methods. So you got hot and fast, you got pre-sear, you got reverse sear, constant flipping, all these different types, and everybody seems to, and one of the things I hate, especially on the internet groups, is people seem to try to put different cooking methods against each other, like which the best one? I want the best cooking method. That's why they'll go, is sous vide the best, or is reverse sear the best, or is the, cooking it, constant flipping the best? And, so what do you guys think about that?
Whatever. I think if I was to define what the best is, it's whatever you like.
Yeah.
Whatever you like is the best.
They all have their merits. And you know what? A lot of people like hanging out by a grill and cooking their steak 100% on the grill. It's fun to hang out by a grill and drink some beer and talk to friends. With sous vide, you're spending just a few minutes at the grill because you have the steak already cooked. You're just putting a sear on it. You don't get to spend half an hour cooking steaks with buddies.
Yeah. Now I do think there are some benefits and some, end results that can be different from the different cooking methods. And that comes down to what you personally like or don't like. Do you like your steaks more tender? You might want to do sous vide and then sear. Do you want, more of a crust, you might want to do the hot and fast. Do you like it a little tougher? You like that, steak bite. Then reverse sear might be for you. So it's all going to boil down to personal preference. They all work. They all do their job. They all produce similar results. Some of them are slightly different. But I'm with you guys. You got to pretty much. I don't think cooking methods aren't out to get each other. They're just cooking methods, and I like to cook things, multiple different ways and enjoy all of it. I cook fried chicken. I cook, barbecue chicken. I cook roasted chicken, and I enjoy them all. I don't sit there and pit those cooking methods against each other. Which is better, fried chicken or roasted chicken? Well, they're both great. I like them both.
Yes, they are.
So why would you sit there and do that with a steak? Is it reverse sear better than
I love a sous vide burger because I can eat a medium rare burger safely, and I like a medium rare burger. But I also really enjoy a smash burger every once in a while, so it depends on what mood I'm in. And a smash burger is well done, and it's super crispy and thin. It's a totally different eating experience, but I enjoy them both.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Now, one thing I want to talk about, and this one I can't get over because I've had the president of the Steak Cook-Off Association on my show, and I've talked to some people that are in these competitions, the cooking type competitions. And one of the things I can't understand is why some of their judging, guidelines that they use, why they use certain things, like with the steak cook-offs. And when they do this, and people who are not knowledgeable and they watch these shows where they see these competitors cooking, that's where I think some of this comes into. Well, I saw this guy, he wins all these competitions doing it this certain way, so that's got to be the best way. And like with the steak, where I'm getting it is the steak cook-off competitions. If you don't have the grill marks, the diamond hatch pattern grill marks on your steak, more than likely you won't win, because that's one of the things they look at as the judges.
Criteria.
But to me, it's a waste because you lose out on the Maillard reaction on that whole steak, which can take away from the flavor. So what are your guys' thoughts on that? I know that a lot of people say, well, you eat with your eyes first, which is true to some extent, but sometimes, that can, if it's taken away from your overall, the way the steak tastes, to me, it's not worth it. But
the pattern's pretty, and where you're eating at the pattern tastes good. But I like constant flipping. I want the Maillard all over the steak, better flavor. So
if you go to these great, these well-known steakhouses like Peter Luger's and stuff, they're putting those steaks under a broiler that's 1,800 degrees. They're not going for grill marks. They're going for the Maillard reaction and a crust on that steak. They don't want it. They want it to taste good. They don't care about how pretty the grill marks look. I mean, grill marks are great, but you're not getting as much flavor as you are if you're getting the Maillard, the Maillard reaction completely across it. And at the end of the day, it comes down to flavor. I'm not a competition circuit steak cooker, so I don't bother with that grill mark stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's where, like I said, back when the barbecue cooking shows were big on the food channel, and people still today, I see them in some of the barbecue groups. They think that the competition cooking is what the level of, that's the best way to cook something, because they saw Johnny Triggs, on one of the barbecue cook-off shows, dumped honey and agave and brown sugar and parquet and stuff on his ribs, that's the way you need to cook them to make them good. But even the barbecue guys will tell you that they only do that for the one bite, to get somebody's attention. But with the steak cook-offs, they're trying to make it look a certain way. And I've seen them now what they do is they tie them up, the ribeye. I'll take a boneless ribeye, and they'll try to make it round. So it doesn't even look like a ribeye to me anymore. It looks more like a top round, a top steak, a top sirloin. And then they make sure they get the grill marks on it. So so much of it is based on a certain appearance just to win that particular steak cook-off. It's not even, doesn't even look appealing to me because it doesn't even look like a ribeye steak anymore. Like I said, it's more of you're not shooting for overall, is that a good steak? It's more of, does it fit into these criteria that are on this sheet? But hey, that's them. That's what they do. People love to do those things. And, you know, if somebody loves to do something and have fun with it, that's fine. But what I don't like is when people that are not familiar with those or don't do it, they put that as, that should be, you know, what the best of this is. That's what, you know, competition barbecue is what, you know, the best ribs are. And it's like, no, not really.
You would never want to eat a whole rack of competition barbecue ribs.
Right. Well, and by the way, I see some of these steak cook. I probably wouldn't want to eat their steaks either because, you know, they look pretty, but you know, I don't want to, just because it's got crosshack, you know, on it, and it's, you know, shaped like a, you know, round softball. You know, it's not appealing to me. So, but
did you guys want to touch on the names of cuts and how they're different from state to state, butcher to butcher?
Sure. Go ahead. Since you brought it up, I'll let you run.
Well, and the reason why I bring it up is I'm Jewish. If you viewers don't already know that, kosher dosher. And although I don't eat kashrut, meaning specifically rabbinically certified kosher meat, I've noticed my friends in New York City, from street corner to street corner, there's different butchers, kosher butchers. And each butcher will have a funky name for a cut of meat. You look at it and go, well, that's a chuck roast. That's something else. They call it all different names. And there's a group on Facebook called, I think, What Kosher Cut Is It Really? And there's a guy on there named Bosch. Bosch is a great guy. And people, I'm looking at it right now. It's called imitation cheek meat. And I'm looking at it like, what the hell is that? So you have guys that know a lot about meat. You put a photograph up and say, hey, what cut is that? And so I find that very unusual in the Jewish community. But also, you talk about the New York Strip. You got the Kansas City Strip, the New York Strip. And in New York City, where I grew up, they call it the club. They didn't call it a strip. They didn't call it a New York. They called it a club.
Yeah.
So I just find this, except for the ribeye is a ribeye. But everything else has a different freaking name.
Yeah, some of them, like with the Kansas City, that's just a New York strip with the bone on it, pretty much. So,
and they call it the club in New York.
Yeah,
they call it the club because of the bone. You can hold it like a club.
Now, what I get confused is, especially since, you know, we're in these Facebook groups and you get people from all over the world in there. You get somebody from England or somebody from Australia or Canada, and they call, you know, ribeye something totally different. They'll call it and you're like, I don't know what that is. You know, but then they ask you, like, you're supposed to know, hey, what's this joint, you know, this or that? And it's like, I don't know. So you got to go look up these other charts, but that's
see a picture.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Interestingly enough, a while ago, I don't know how long ago, someone decided, hey, we need to standardize this stuff. And so they created the Meat Buyer's Guide, which actually does standardize all the American cuts. You know, you can say, I want a 106, which is ribeye, roast, blah, blah, blah. You know, I want a 106A, which is a little different. There are variations. I don't know if you guys have looked through the Meat Buyer's Guide. You can look it up online and look at it you can look at it for free. You don't have to buy the book. The book's pretty expensive. But there is a resource out there in this country that standardizes everything. But it doesn't mean that somebody can't call it whatever they want. You know, like the bistro tenderloin for a terrace major. Yeah, and fish is the same way. You know, I mean, there's so many different names for the same fish, and people mislabel fish, and
it's like getting back to the top round being labeled London broil in the supermarkets. You know, they label it that, and then people automatically think that that's a cut, and it's really not. But also prime rib, people will say, "Ooh, prime rib! I got a prime rib." Well, what's the cut prime rib? It's just rib, you know, and it's somebody can say that it's between this part and this, you know, this rib and that rib, but that's even up for grabs, because if you look it up online, you do a search and you really can't find to where anybody really says that. You could take any rib roast and say that it's, prime rib, Now, if it's more towards the chuck and it's more like the chuck eye section, maybe that's not quite prime rib anymore, but yeah, you get into these different, I don't know, like you were talking about the Delmonico, it's not really a cut that you could find, but what you were talking about, that those numbers in that book, isn't that mostly for restaurants and hotels ordering pretty much like on a wholesale basis, Kevin?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, it's a professional book.
Yeah.
I mean, it's for professionals, but anybody can buy it. You can get it on Amazon.
A lot of times your local butcher though won't know that, because they're not, like we said, they're not butchering from a steer anymore. They're butchering out of out of boxed beef. So they're really not familiar with a lot of that stuff anymore. They're just, they're getting the primals, separated already, and they're just cutting them into steaks for you. They're not breaking it down. Now you do have some out there that are specializing in doing the, like we said, the seam butchery, now, but that's few and far between still. Like I said, I went literally a month ago and got, to a butcher shop that's been there 20 years. And, he told me he was giving me tri-tip. I got it home and it was picanha because, he didn't know what he was doing. So.
Well, at least it wasn't chuck roast.
No. And that's, it's things like that. People can kind of confused, and, I don't know. All right, guys. Anything else we can talk about steaks? I think we're about out of time. Do you guys want to talk about like the different parts of like even a ribeye? Where you've got the ribeye, the eye section of the ribeye, and then the spinalis.
The eye, and then the cap. Oh, yeah. Gosh.
Because I know that was a big thing a while ago, and I think Costco stopped doing it, where they were actually just pulled the spinalis off, which is the top muscle that kind of sat on top of that fat cap that sat on top of the.
They'd roll it and cut it into steaks. Yeah.
They would roll it and cut it into steaks, but I think they stopped doing that because they charged, I think it was like almost $20 a pound that they charged for that.
Yes, they did.
$19.99 a pound is what I paid. I paid $20 a pound for them, and that was.
Yes.
Yeah, I think they did stop doing them. I've heard differing. I'm not seeing them on any of those sous vide groups anymore. So, and Costco was a big place that was doing them. So, yeah. I haven't been to a Costco in a year or two, so I don't know.
I haven't seen them in a while, and like you said, I haven't seen them people posting about them anymore. And I think what it was is that they would pull the spinalis off and try to sell the ribeye with just the eye section, and people were buying them and being dissatisfied with it because they were still charging a pretty penny for it, like they were a full ribeye, and so people were kind of getting ticked off, But again, Costco blade tenderizes everything also, so that's another reason. I never buy pre-cut steaks at Costco. I always buy the whole the primals and cut my own steaks, but and I never actually had those, so because I couldn't see paying $20 a pound for them, where I could actually buy the primal and cut it myself like that.
I gotta tell you, I've never had a good Costco steak. Call me a snob. I've never had a good Costco steak. Even from the prime section, I buy a cryovac and I do okay.
Yeah, I buy them cryovac, and then I actually age the primals before I
do
start
the same
slicing.
thing.
Yeah, because
if you 2 or 3 weeks.
And we can talk about that too, because with Costco especially, most of their meat is pretty green, which just means they don't age it at all. They don't do much wet aging at all. When they butcher it, I mean, they wait for the rigor to go away, and then they slice it up, butcher it, and send it to the stores. So, just for example, I told you I ordered this cow. I had the processor hang it for 2 weeks to dry age it, before he even cuts it up. Now with Costco, they slaughter it 2 days later. They slice it up and send it out to the stores. They got no aging time on them. So even if you're buying the subprimals or the primal sections, you need to age them because it will just make it more flavorful and tenderize it some. But yeah, I at least a week or two when I buy I like to buy their top sirloin sections, and I'll age those for at least 2 weeks before I cut them up into steaks.
What's funny, you mentioned the jacquarding. the needling they do. I watched a video on the guy doing the steak competition stuff, and he did it just like you said, tied it up, made it round. He also jacquarded that steak, and he cooked it to medium rare. I think medium rare. I forget what they go for. But yeah, he actually jacquarded that steak, and I was like, wow, that's probably not the safest thing to send to your judges, but it's competition, so who cares, I guess.
Not to mention, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I don't.
If you read the fine label on Costco's mechanically tenderized steaks known as jacquarding, it says cooked to 160.
165.
Yeah, because they know you're not. I'm not saying that the surface pathogens, but if there were surface pathogens, you're injecting it into the interior of the meat. Yeah, so It's like, and of course, if you sous vide to pasteurization, you don't have to worry about that.
The biggest issue for me on the blade tenderization is not the potential of it, getting me sick. It's damaging the meat. It's tearing the meat up. there's other ways you can do what they're doing with that are not going to affect the outcome of the meat. And like I said, I've jacquarded some myself, and it's the texture is just not the same. So all right, guys. I think we've covered just about everything we could talk about steaks, but well, how do you like yours? Medium rare, medium, well done? What's that? Let's talk about that.
Oh, gosh. Let Kevin talk about his chart that I actually designed, and I think it's spot on. So.
Oh, the sevens, the rule of sevens?
This rule of seven, man. It's freaking outstanding. Yes, it works.
So you only have to remember two numbers, 7 and 122. So rare starts at 122. Add 7 to 122, you get 129. So your rare range is 122 to 129. Then you start at 130. 130, add 7, 130 to 130. I think I'm doing my math right. Anyway, you get the idea. You start at 122, add 7 for rare. Then you start at 130, add 7. There's your range for medium rare. Keep going on. Then you get medium well, and then well done. It makes it super easy.
It makes sense.
It works. It works fine. I mean, it really. No one that's ever tried it that I've talked to has argued with me originally about temperatures. I mean, I know people that define medium rare as 131 to 134. So you have a 3-degree variation. And I'm like, that makes no sense. I mean, there's obviously, and like Lloyd did his experiment on Can You Tell the Difference? And he did steaks at like 131, 132, 133, 134, blah, blah, blah. And you can't tell the difference between the color of a steak at 131 and one at 135.
Right.
Maybe not even 137. So the rule of 7 because everyone, I mean, you'll just see temperature ranges all over the charts. I see people saying a rare steak is 108 degrees.
Right.
Like that's a raw steak.
Exactly.
That's not a rare steak. That's a raw steak.
There's a big difference between raw and rare. That's for sure. And
yeah.
And I have no qualms, but people can eat meat any way done this they want. If somebody likes to eat their stuff well done. I had in-laws that, when I used to cringe when I had to cook for them because I had to cook theirs, well done and make sure there was absolutely no red in it at all. So that there was no juice in it, but that's the way they like to eat it. I mean, I love the fact that there is, especially with sous vide, you have that range though. And, with the time and the temp where now you just don't have just that temperature of what's medium rare. You can actually make something that's normally tough and medium rare and make it tender by using the sous vide method as well. So,
an interesting observation I've made with people who eat their steak well done is if you meet their parents eat their steak well done.
Right.
So that's what they grew up with. That's why they like it. No one grew up eating. I don't know anyone or ever heard of anyone growing up with parents who cooked their meat and they were served meat medium rare, and all of a sudden they switched their mind and decided they like it well done.
Right, and it comes from a cultural thing, So,
most of the world eats their meat well done. Yeah. The vast majority of the world eats their meat well done.
Well, and a lot of it is because there used to be a lot bigger percentage of you being able to get sick if you didn't cook it all the way because it was either
Absolutely.
Not refrigerated properly or any number of issues with it, parasites, anything, I mean, I know that was one of the things with my in-laws is they came from a time where, you could be eating a bad piece of meat. And if you cook the hell out of it, more than likely you could kill any bacteria that were in it. So,
well, Thanksgiving is
it's like pork.
Right?
Well, it's like pork. People still get the trichinosis. Ooh, you can get trichinosis if you eat, undercooked pork. Well, that's pretty much gone anymore. So now you can, but with the sous vide coming on board, you can do a lot of things now that can get rid of that part of it as well. So. All right, guys. Well, I want to thank you guys for being on. I'm sure there's more we could have talked about with steak, but I mean, it's a hot topic. Well, it looks like we lost Kevin, but I want to thank you, Lloyd. I'm sure he'll be on again. It was great talking to you guys about steak, and I'm sure we'll do this again next month, and we'll find something else we can, talk about, delve deep into. And thanks again, Lloyd. Lloyd, check out Lloyd's blog, The Kosher Dosher. He does a lot of experiments and fun stuff with sous vide and other things. He does not just sous vide, he does all kinds of cooking. So
I got a new one coming up too in the next couple of weeks. A new experiment.
All right.
New experiment. So
always look forward to that. But thanks for joining us. Make sure you follow us on the Fire and Water Cooking YouTube channel, Facebook group and page, and see you on the next Fire and Water Cooking podcast.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks again for joining us here on the Fire and Water Cooking podcast. I want to thank Lloyd and Kevin again for being on. Make sure you follow them on the Kosher Dosher blog and Facebook group, Sous Vide Food and Fun. Make sure you follow us on the Fire and Water Cooking podcast, YouTube channel, Facebook group and page, and the website. I'll see you on the next Fire and Water Cooking podcast.